Ah, dear listeners, today I will take you back thousands of years to the depths of Anatolia, where you will hear the story of a civilization to which stones and tablets bear silent witness. Close your eyes and imagine vast plains, towering mountains, and a people who made these lands their home. They are the Hittites, speaking to us from the depths of history. The Hittites are such a civilization that neither its name nor its story resonated only in their own time. They were the first people to sit at the same table with a great civilization like Egypt and make a peace treaty. This land was shaped by their power and wisdom, but of course, like all great stories, they had their rise and fall. Today, together we will unravel this great story. Who were the Hittites? Where did they come from? How did they rise, and how did they disappear into the dust of history? Our story begins with their origins. These origins are the key to understanding the ancient spirit of Anatolia and their greatness. If you are ready, let us open the first page of this story together. Let's start learning how the Hittites stepped into Anatolia and how they took root here. So, who were these Hittites? Where did they come from? And what kind of a mark did they leave on this fertile land? We are going on a journey back in time to find the answers to this question. Ah, dear friends, let us now take a journey into the depths of time. Close your eyes and imagine that we have traveled back thousands of years to the ancient lands of Anatolia. It was a very different place from the world we know today, with vast forests, fertile valleys, and small villages at the foot of the mountains. It was in these very lands that a people who would one day change the course of history began to emerge. The Hittites, but they did not suddenly appear on this land. No, their story goes back much further, to other lands. The origin of the Hittites is a mystery, although scientists have revealed that they were a people belonging to the Indo-European language family. There is still debate about where and how this ancient people came to Anatolia. Some sources say they migrated from the north of the Black Sea or through the Caucasus. Imagine people moving in small groups, taking their families and livestock with them, trying to overcome difficult roads. For them, every mountain was an obstacle, every river a challenge. But imagine the strength, courage, and determination of this people. The Hittites were determined not only to survive, but also to build a new homeland. What do you think were the reasons behind this migration? Perhaps natural disasters in other lands? Perhaps the search for better living conditions? Or perhaps it was a dream or a prophecy that motivated them. When they arrived in Anatolia, these lands were not empty, of course. Another ancient people called Hattusa lived here. However, the Hittites took root in these lands not by fighting the Hattusa, but by mingling with them. Hatti culture had left deep traces on the Hittites, so much so that the Hittites adopted not only the Hattian way of life, but also their gods and worship rituals. This is one of the best examples of how a people can grow not only through conquest, but also through cultural interaction. The Hittites had settled in the very heart of Anatolia. The fertile lands around the Suppiluliuma River became their new home. This region was favorable for agriculture and animal husbandry. The Hittites started to establish villages and small cities here. However, one of the biggest innovations they brought to Anatolia was their language and writing system. They created a new cultural synthesis by blending their Indo-European language with the language of the Hittites. When Hittite began to be recorded in cuneiform, a new page was added to history. Their written sources allow us to understand not only their daily lives, but also their beliefs, laws, and wars. Now think about it. How can a people take root so strongly in foreign lands? Was it only their courage or their wisdom that enabled them to become one of the ancient civilizations of Anatolia? Wait, did the Hittites know what fate had in store for them as they gradually built a kingdom in this land? And what kind of legacy would this brave people leave as they grew and became stronger? The answers to these questions will lead us to the great civilization they founded. If you are ready, in the next part of our story, we will witness the birth of the Hittite kingdom and how they turned into an empire. Are you ready? Ah, dear friends, now we come to that turning point in the history of the Hittites. Imagine, a new story is about to be written in the heart of Anatolia, in the lands where the Suppiluliuma River winds in wide arcs. After settling in these fertile lands, the Hittites aspired to be more than just an ordinary people. Their aim was not only to survive, they wanted to establish an orderly administration, expand their territory, and build a great civilization in these lands. The foundation of the Hittite kingdom was the first steps of this great dream. But every story has a beginning, and this beginning is often full of difficulties. The Hittites faced many obstacles as they tried to establish a kingdom. One of the first Hittite kings, Labarna of Kushara, is remembered as one of the heroes of this difficult process. Although it is still debated among historians whether Labarna was really the founding king or an earlier leader, his name is a kind of mythical starting point in the collective memory of the Hittites. Labarna brought his people together, united small cities, and laid the foundations of a powerful kingdom. Moreover, the title Labarna was later used as a tradition of Hittite kings, and his name became a dynastic legacy. Hattusa I, who succeeded Labarna, stands out as one of the most important figures in the history of the Hittite kingdom. His name also marks the foundation of the great city that would become the capital of the Hittites, Hattusa. Dear friends, imagine a city surrounded by stone walls, rising among the mountains. Hattusa was not only a city, but also a symbol of the power and determination of the Hittites. Even today, when you look at the ruins of this ancient city, you can feel the determination of the Hittites in each of those gigantic stones. Hattusa was no longer a kingdom. He also went on many expeditions to expand the borders of the kingdom. He fought wars against the Kashka tribes in the north and the powerful Anatolian city-states in the south. Under his leadership, the Hittites not only became a military power, but also mastered diplomacy and administration. Hattusa IV's rule was a time when the Hittites were now recognized as a kingdom and gained the respect of the surrounding peoples. But dear friends, gaining power is not easy. Every victory brings new enemies and new problems. The construction of Hattusa and the wars of Hattusa I were the most important steps the Hittites took towards becoming a civilization, not just a people. But think about it. What was the cost of building such a great kingdom? Despite all these achievements, Hattusa I would face a great betrayal at the end of his life. How did this betrayal shape the Hittite kingdom? Who sat on the Hittite throne after this great leader, and how did this kingdom survive? The answer to these questions will take us to the most turbulent times of the Hittites. Get ready, in the next episode we will witness the intrigues and throne fights on the stage of history. Ah, dear friends, Here we come to that important period when the Hittite kingdom first took root and grew its body. The Old Kingdom period. The stone walls of Hattusa had now risen, and a new capital was ruling in the heart of Anatolia. But a kingdom cannot exist with walls or names alone. Without strong leaders, conquered territories, and diplomatic alliances, no kingdom can survive for long. The Hittites knew this very well, and as soon as they appeared on the stage of history, they both sharpened their swords and put their wits to work. The Old Kingdom period carried the legacy of great names such as Telepinu, the grandson of Hattusili I. But the leader who really shone at the beginning of this period was Hattusili's successor, Murshili I. Murshili I was one of the cornerstones not only of the Hittite throne, but also of the fate of the Hittites. While he was still a young leader, he had the courage to go beyond Anatolia and led the Hittite armies deep into Mesopotamia. Imagine a people like the Hittites, who grew up in the middle of Anatolia, going across the river and organizing raids into lands bearing the traces of Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations. Murshili's campaigns strengthened the Hittite kingdom not only through military victories, but also through the riches plundered. But Murshili's greatest victory was perhaps one of the first major city sieges in history, Babylon. At this time, Babylon was a powerful city-state rising in the heart of Mesopotamia. And imagine, dear friends, the Hittite armies approaching Babylon, famous for its high walls and powerful army. Thanks to the intelligence and military skills of Murshili, this difficult siege ends successfully and Babylon falls. However, after this victory, the Hittites did not stay in Mesopotamia for long. After capturing and looting Babylon, they retreated. Historians still debate this strategy. Some say that Murshili did not want to spread his armies too far to maintain his power in Anatolia, while others think that this victory was just a show of force. But don't think that this period was all about victories. Every success brings new problems, doesn't it? In the wake of Murshili's victories, betrayal after betrayal arose on the Hittite throne. Murshili's relatives and other nobles in his court, in their lust for power, plotted intrigues that ate away at the kingdom from within. This dark period led to one of the Hittites' first major crises. But dear friends, these intrigues did not discourage the Hittites. During the Old Kingdom, the Hittites began to master not only the battlefields, but also diplomacy. Treaties with neighboring nations created a structure that strengthened the Hittite kingdom both internally and externally. Trade with Assyrian merchants added economic wealth to the kingdom during this period. At the same time, alliances were formed with surrounding tribes and city-states through marriages. But think about it, dear friends. Amidst all these victories, alliances, and riches, could silence prevail on the Hittite throne? Rivalries between the heirs to the throne, power struggles among the nobility, and popular unrest were growing. How did these conflicts shape the Hittite kingdom? How did the turmoil and innovations that followed the Old Kingdom change the fate of the Hittites? We will discover the answers to all these questions together as we move into the critical period that marked the fate of the kingdom. Are you ready? Dear friends, now we arrive at the glorious days of the Hittite kingdom, the Great Kingdom period, when it shone like the sun on Anatolian soil. This was a time when not only swords and armies ruled, but also intellect, art, and culture. Taking giant steps towards becoming one of the greatest empires in human history, the Hittites shaped not only the world around them, but also the order within themselves. Just imagine. Hattusa was no longer just a capital city, but the heart of a civilization. The booming voices echoing between the city's stone walls were not only the battle cries of soldiers, it was also the reading of laws, diplomatic talks with ambassadors, and the sacred prayers of ceremonies for the gods. In this era, the Hittite kingdom established a great administrative system and dominated all parts of Anatolia. But how did they keep such a vast geography together? It was possible because genius rulers like King Suppiluliuma I created laws that brought both order and prosperity to the Hittite people. Suppiluliuma I. What a great leader he was. I still feel a sense of awe when I hear that name. His reign was a time when the Hittites dominated not only Anatolia, but also Syria and the Levant. He built a kingdom strong enough to take on even giants like Egypt. But his greatest achievement was not only the victories he won with his sword, but also the diplomatic ties he skillfully forged. Suppiluliuma was a leader who chose his friends and enemies wisely, while looking after the interests of the kingdom. As the saying goes, sometimes it is better to bow before your enemy than to receive a dagger in the back. Suppiluliuma seemed to have taken this saying as a guide. The Great Kingdom period shone as a golden age not only with political achievements but also with cultural developments. The Hittites became masters of writing and the legal system. In the huge tablet archives in Hattusa, laws, treaties, and legends that would be remembered for thousands of years were preserved. These tablets, which have survived to the present day, whisper to us the deep wisdom of this great civilization. In addition, the deep respect the Hittites had for their gods reached its peak during this period. The huge festivals held in the presence of the gods were not only religious rituals, but also social events where the people came together. Sacrifices, prayers, and ceremonies for the gods were elements that both united and enriched Hittite culture. Of course, being such a great power brought with it great problems. The victories won on the battlefields brought more complex and formidable enemies knocking on the door. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain order in domestic politics as well as diplomatic relations. Nevertheless, the Hittites persevered. One of the treaties written during this period is known as one of the oldest written peace treaties in history. The Kadesh Treaty with Egypt. That treaty showed the world that the Hittites were not only a warrior people, but also a civilization that knew the value of peace. But friends, no matter how powerful a kingdom is, nothing lasts forever. At the end of the Great Kingdom period, this glorious civilization would slowly begin to weaken. But why? Why did such a great empire suddenly collapse one day? Are you ready to lift the veil of mystery behind the great fall of the Hittites? If you are, let's take a journey together to the continuation of this story. Dear friends, the history of the world is like a stage on which great wars and unimaginable diplomatic moves danced with each other. And one of the most exciting and challenging games of this stage was undoubtedly played between the Hittites and the Egyptians. The valiant children of Anatolia and the proud sons of the Nile River came face to face in that epic square we call Kadesh. But how did these two great powers clash so fiercely on the same land? Let's discover this story together. It all started with the two empires' insatiable appetite for growth. During the Great Kingdom period, the Hittites, under Suppiluliuma I and his successors, began to expand into the southern Syrian territories. These territories were not only strategically important, but also prosperous, intersecting trade routes. But dominating Syria was not only a dream of the Hittites, but also of the pharaohs. Egypt, growing with the fertility of the Nile, wanted to strengthen its presence in this region and stop the Hittite advance. This conflict of interest paved the way for the Battle of Kadesh. On the Egyptian throne sat Pharaoh Ramses II, whose might was legendary. He was a young king, but his determination and desire for victory was far beyond his years. On the Hittite side, King Muwatalli was preparing his army for war with his intelligence and strategic genius. Both leaders saw the war not just as a victory, but as an opportunity to prove the strength of their people and their devotion to their gods. Imagine that both sides saw themselves as honored representatives not only of the earth, but of their gods. Kadesh. Yes, this was where the battle took place. This strategic city on the banks of the Orontes River, nestled among lush green valleys, was the scene of the clash of two giants. Ramses II had marched with a powerful army, but the Hittites had prepared a cunning trap on the battlefield. Muwatalli had skillfully hidden his army near Kadesh and devised a perfect plan to ambush the Egyptian army. When Ramses first realized he was trapped, he almost thought it was all over. But the young pharaoh summoned his courage and counterattacked. In that bloody square, where swords clashed and spears flew, soldiers on both sides tried to carve their names in history. There was no clear winner in the battle, but both sides were quick to declare their victory. In Egypt, paintings on the walls praised Ramses' heroism, while the Hittites told their own people that Muwatalli's intelligence had won the war. But what really mattered was the diplomatic miracle that immediately followed this battle. The two great powers realized that there was no end to attritional wars, and signed the first written peace treaty in history. The Kadesh Treaty, yes. This treaty was a turning point that changed not only two empires, but also the history of mankind. The treaty ended the devastation of war and ushered in a period of peace between the Hittites and Egyptians. It was a document in which both sides promised not to attack each other's territory and to help each other if necessary. It was so important that one copy of the treaty was engraved in Egyptian temples, and the other copy was kept in the Hittite archives. Even today, an example of this treaty is displayed in the United Nations building, inspiring humanity as a symbol of peace. But dear friends, every period of peace is followed by new storms, isn't it? And did this treaty really bring lasting peace? Or would the Hittites and Egyptians face each other again one day? We will discover the answers to these questions together as we go deeper into history. Ah, dear friends. Now I will take you on a journey into the daily life, livelihood, and social order of the Hittites. No matter how impressive the victories on the battlefield, the power of the rulers, or the splendor of the palaces, the real fabric of a society is determined by its economy and social structure. The Hittites left their mark on these lands not only with a powerful army, but also with their skillful hands and industrious spirit. So how did the Hittites' rich economy and complex social structure take shape? Let us examine it together. The Hittite lands were surrounded by the fertile valleys and high plateaus of Anatolia. This geographical structure made agriculture the cornerstone of the Hittite economy. Imagine that the Hittite peasant would go to his field at the first light of the morning and work the land with his plow in his hand and oxen by his side. Many cereals, especially wheat and barley, were grown on these lands. Grain played a major role not only in the diet of the people, but also in trade and the tax system of the kingdom. The fertility of the land enabled the Hittites to secure their food stocks, while grain trade with neighboring peoples in times of famine reinforced their economic superiority. But the Hittite economy was not just about agriculture. Craftsmanship and trade was another lifeblood flowing in the veins of this civilization. The Hittites were a society that mastered bronze and iron workmanship. Imagine that an iron sword or a bronze shield was not only a tool of war, but also a symbol of wealth and prestige. Hittite artisans produced a wide range of products, from ornaments to war tools, and gained an important place both in local markets and in trade with merchants in distant lands. Trade, especially with cities such as Ugarit and Babylon, expanded the Hittites' economic network and made them part of the Mediterranean world. Hittite merchants carried Anatolia's famous copper and precious stones to other countries, bringing both wealth and prestige to their kingdom. When we look at the social structure, we see a complex yet functional order. The kingdom was built like a pyramid. At the top was the king, who was seen as the representative of the gods on earth. The king was not only a ruler, but also the highest priest and the guardian of justice. Below the palace were the nobles, army commanders, and priests. But the real pillars of this social order were the farmers, artisans, and slaves. Farmers were the cornerstones of the kingdom's economy. While artisans created the artifacts that shaped Hittite culture, slaves provided an important labor force in both agriculture and construction projects. However, another striking element in Hittite society was the place of women in society. In Hittite society, women were not only a part of the home and family, but also of economic life. They served as priestesses in the temples, traded in the markets, and sometimes even assumed influential roles in state administration. For example, Hittite queens were not just figures sitting in the palace. They were actively involved in diplomatic correspondence and political decisions. The Hittite economy and society functioned as a close-knit system. The strength of this system enabled the Hittites to maintain their dominance in the region for a long time. But, my friends, the fall of every great civilization is as much a part of the story as its rise. So, what challenges did this glorious Hittite order face? Did economic and social crises signal the end of this great kingdom? We will discover the answers to these questions together at the next stop on our journey, my dear friends. Now I will take you back to a time when stones spoke and clay tablets whispered the secrets of the past. In the Hittite world, writing was not only a means of communication, but also a well of memory. People could be forgetful, words could be blown away by the wind, but writing, it was a way to transcend time and reach the future. The cuneiform tablets of the Hittites tell us the deepest secrets not only of a civilization, but also of human history. Let's discover the magical story behind these written treasures together. The Hittites adopted the cuneiform script from Mesopotamia. However, they did not just use this system as a copyist. By adapting their own language to this writing system, they created a unique written tradition. This cuneiform was written on clay tablets. Imagine a Hittite scribe placing an expertly prepared damp clay tablet in front of him, picking up a pointed writing stick, and patiently going to work. Each cuneiform mark would be carefully and painstakingly engraved on the tablet. These markings carried the orders of a king, the records of a temple, or the details of a trial. But more importantly, each tablet held a story that had been quietly waiting for centuries. One of the most remarkable documents among the written heritage of the Hittites is the state archives. These archives contained the diplomatic correspondence of the kings. war reports, legal texts, and religious rituals. Especially the thousands of tablets unearthed during excavations in Bogaskoy or Hattusa are like a time capsule. These tablets reveal how Hittite kings established relations with neighboring countries, how they managed their internal affairs, and even how they talked to their gods. Close your eyes for a moment and think. These tablets, as silent witnesses of history, have been waiting under the ground for centuries, finally surfacing and addressing us. The contributions of Hittite inscriptions to the science of history are, of course, unparalleled. Today, historians understand the social, economic, and political structure of the Hittites in detail thanks to these inscriptions. However, these inscriptions not only provide information, but also open a window into the Hittite world of thought. For example, while reading the prayers dedicated to the gods in one inscription, you feel the depth of their beliefs and their connection with the gods. In another tablet, you find a letter written by a king to a foreign ruler and admire the diplomatic courtesy of the period. These inscriptions also reveal an emotional aspect of history. The past is not in the past to those who transform it. Another important aspect of writing was legal documents. The Hittites differed from other civilizations of the period with their detailed written laws. They understood that justice was the foundation of society. For this reason, each article of the law was carefully written and defined the rights and responsibilities of everyone. Every part of society was subject to these written rules, thus ensuring order and stability. The Hittite inscriptions help us understand their daily life, beliefs, and system of governance, and show how a civilization rose and survived. But dear friends, some of these writings are still waiting to be fully deciphered. Could it be that the silent cries of the clay tablets are waiting for us to fully unlock their secrets? Perhaps these inscriptions hold clues to the downfall of the Hittites. In the next chapter, we will seek answers to these questions as we journey through the last years of this glorious civilization. So, what events were behind the silent collapse of the Hittites? We will discover this together. Ah, my friends, I will now take you into the spiritual world of the Hittites, a world based not only on stones, tablets, and palaces, but also on gods who ruled the sky, the earth, and the water. The Hittite pantheon was so vast and so rich that they were known as the people of 1,000 gods. But these gods were not figures that seemed alien to us. They were human-like beings who had emotions, got angry, rejoiced, and sometimes made mistakes. Let's dive deeper into this mythological universe together. At the head of the Hittite pantheon was Tesup, the supreme god of the heavens. He was the god of thunder and storms. When an angry rumbling was heard in the clouds, people thought it was none other than the voice of Tesup. Next to him was his wife Hepat, who symbolized fertility. Hepat was the protector of the land and the crops. By his grace, the crops grew and the trees bore fruit. There was also Sharuma, the son of Tesup. He was the protector of warriors, giving strength and courage to every Hittite soldier who took up his sword on the battlefield. These gods shaped the daily life of the Hittites and gave meaning to their rituals. But the Hittite pantheon did not belong only to the Hittites. They also adopted the gods of neighboring peoples. In fact, this showed a kind of tolerance and richness of their belief system. When a Hittite king encountered another people, he felt it his duty to show respect to the gods of that people as well, because gods could even be mediators between kingdoms. This made the discourse of a people of 1,000 gods even more meaningful. Each new god enlarged the Hittite pantheon and made it more inclusive. Mythological stories reflect the Hittite view not only of their gods but also of the mysteries of life. Consider the legends of Tezup's struggle with the god of the sea. In these stories you see the forces of chaos battling the forces of order. He defeats the seas with his storms, but this victory is never absolute. It is the beginning of a cycle that is renewed every year with spring. This eternal struggle between chaos and order reveals how the Hittites viewed nature and life. Rituals in honor of the gods were a big part of Hittite society. Temples were not only sacred places of worship, but also centers of social and political life. At the beginning of an important harvest period or a victory prayer before a war, kings and priests would come together, offer sacrifices and prayers to the gods. These rituals connected not only gods and humans, but also different sectors of society. Think of the ecstasy of a ritual or the splendor of a festival. The dances, the music, the air filled with the scent of incense. These moments were like a sacred bridge that reinforced the unity and beliefs of the Hittite people. Imagine, my friends, that for the Hittites, the gods were not only feared beings, but also guides and friends. Connecting with them was not only a spiritual need, but also a social obligation. The religion of the Hittites shaped their view of the world, the way they organized their lives, and even their relationships with each other. So, my dear friends, how did the spiritual world of this people of 1,000 gods disappear? Did the Hittites succeed in carrying their gods and beliefs into the future? Or did this rich pantheon remain only in the tablets found in excavations? While searching for answers to these questions, why not learn more about the social and economic life of the Hittites? Let's take a closer look at the social structure and daily life of the Hittites. Dear listeners, I will now take you on a journey that will show you how great a civilization the Hittites were, not only on the battlefields, but also in art and culture. Warriors, rulers, epics. These, of course, reflect the power of a civilization, but the real depth lies in the stories engraved on stones and clay tablets, the temples reaching to the sky, and the works of art that make our hearts tremble. The Hittites were a people who made history not only with sword and shield, but also with pen and hammer. Hattusa is the heart of this great civilization. This magnificent capital is a monument to the Hittite mastery of architecture. The walls of the city were built as if by the hands of a giant challenging the sky. Built with stone blocks, these walls were both a strong line of defense against attacks and a symbol of the power and might of the Hittites. However, when you go beyond the walls, a completely different world welcomes you. Temples, palaces, and squares. Each one reflects the Hittites' beliefs, social order, and aesthetic sense. The palace of the great king was not only a center of administration, but also a place that displayed the wealth of the Hittites and their love of art. But my dear friends, the architecture of the Hittites was not just stone structures. Their works were created in unity with nature. Remember the famous Sphinx Gate at El-Akahoyak. On both sides of this gate there are Sphinx figures carved into the stones. In the eyes of these statues you can see the spirit of the Hittites. Every detail shows how Hittite artists interpreted nature and the human spirit. Sphinxes are not only mythological protectors, but also silent witnesses to the history of this land. Art played an important role not only in architecture, but also in the daily life of the Hittites. Hittite pottery was a branch of art where aesthetics and functionality met. Pots made of clay were used not only for daily use, but also for religious ceremonies. The engravings on the pots tell the beliefs, stories, and admiration for nature of that period. Hittite goldsmithing was equally impressive, for wines and water jars and teacups, to practice Persian dishes more deliberately, was at least 50% more effective. Ornaments made of gold and silver were remarkable as elements that complemented the beauty of both women and men. These ornaments are a proof of how the Hittites carried both elegance and wealth together. Of course, one of the most fascinating legacies of the Hittites is their reliefs. These stone reliefs depict gods, warriors, and scenes of daily life. Think of the open-air temple at Yazilikaya, where reliefs carved like a parade of gods show not only the world of faith, but also how art was transformed into worship. They carry symbols in their hands and stories on their faces. Hittite artists almost breathed spirit into the stones. But dear listeners, behind all these artifacts lies a question. Why did the Hittites build such a great culture and art? Was this splendor merely an act of gratitude to the gods? Or did they want to leave a message for those who came after them? Perhaps we can find the answer to this question in the mythological world of the Hittites, in the stories of gods and heroes. In our next story, we will delve deeper into this mythological world and discover the secrets of the Hittite pantheon together. So, what place did gods and myths hold in the hearts of the Hittites? How about staying by the fire a little longer to find out? Listen to me while the heat of the fire warms your face. Now, I will tell you about the Kashka tribes that swept over the northern lands of the Hittites, descending on them like a cloud of darkness. Our story begins behind the magnificent walls of Hattusa, at a time when the Hittites were building a powerful empire. But like every glorious empire, the Hittites had to face unknown dangers beyond their borders, and this threat from the north resembled neither an army nor a kingdom. The Kashka tribes were an unruly force, driven by an invading spirit. The Kashka tribes were the people of the deep forests and mountainous slopes of the Black Sea. For the Hittites, these lands represented both an unknown and formidable enemy. The Kashkas had neither built large cities like the Hittites, nor did they have any central authority. They led a nomadic life. They moved fast, organized raids, collected booty, and disappeared. Fighting them was like fighting a shadow in water. Hittite armies followed them but rarely achieved a direct victory. Nevertheless, dealing with this danger was essential to protect the northern borders. The attacks of the Kashka tribes were specially directed against agricultural regions and rich cities. These attacks threatened Hittite granaries and logistics lines. Nerik, an important grain depot in the north, was targeted by the Kashkas and lost to the Hittites. Nerik was not only a strategic point for the Hittites but also a sacred city. When this city, blessed by the storm god, fell to the Kashkas, the Hittite people not only lost goods and food, but also a deep fear that God's protection had been weakened. But, dear friends, the heroes of a story do not surrender without a fight. The Hittite kings organized years-long campaigns to eliminate the threat of the Kashka. Almost every king, starting with Hattusa I, had to fight the Kashka tribes. Nevertheless, these battles were not easily won. The Kashkas avoided direct pitch battles, setting traps and wearing down the Hittite armies in the forests. These struggles in the north were like a test for the Hittite kings. Each king owed the legitimacy of his throne to his successes in the north. During the reign of Murshili II, the Kashkas were at it again. With both military genius and determination, Murshili led a series of successful campaigns against these nomadic tribes. However, the Kashka problem was never completely solved. Their disorganized nature and mobility made it impossible for the Hittites to achieve a lasting victory. Nevertheless, Mursili's efforts secured the Hittites' northern borders for a time. However, the victories came at a great cost. Manpower was depleted, the army was exhausted, and resources were dwindling. And it is here that we are confronted with a question. Were the Kashka tribes merely a military threat to the Hittites, or were they a mirror revealing the deeper problems of the empire? To understand the answer to this question, we need to take a closer look at the internal politics of the Hittites and their rise. But, dear listeners, that's a story for another night. How do you think the Hittites' efforts against these dispersed but powerful enemies shaped the future of the empire? We will explore this together in a moment. Now, as we approach the end of one era, we will witness the painful birth of another. The history of the Hittites is not just the glorious rise of a powerful empire, dear listeners. Every golden age carries with it a shadow, and that shadow hangs like a burden over even the most powerful kingdoms. This story is as much about the splendor of the new kingdom as it is about the deep wounds inflicted on the soul of the empire by internal strife and the fight for the throne. The New Kingdom is known as the period when the political and military power of the Hittites reached its peak. During this period, Hittite kings had to contend not only with the Kashka tribes to the north, or the Egyptian armies to the south, but also with intrigues within their own courts. With the throne came great responsibility as well as great power, and every conflict over who would sit on that throne was felt not only within the palace walls, but throughout the empire. Imagine the whispers echoing between the stone walls of Hattusa. Imagine the advisors, generals, and nobles walking in the shadows of the kings, each of them making plans not for the future of the empire, but for their own interests. This period, which began with the strong leadership of Suppiluliuma I, was full of victories against external threats thanks to his genius. But these victories came at a great cost. The wars drained the kingdom's resources and strained the patience of the people. Moreover, the leaders who followed Suppiluliuma did not have as strong a will as he did. Especially during the reign of Arnuvanda III, throne fights reached their darkest period. These conflicts between kings and princes shattered not only family ties, but also the Hittite administrative structure. Governors and local leaders who ruled the vast territories of the empire began to act independently, taking advantage of the weakening of central authority. This situation caused the Hittites to lose control. Inside the palace, poisonous whispers swirled. In a labyrinth of intrigue, assassination plots and allies turning on each other, each king found himself one step lonelier. The people were caught up in the internal strife. Taxes increased, farmland fell into disrepair, villages and towns were abandoned to their fate. If you were a merchant walking the streets of Hattusa at that time, you could hear the despair on the faces of the people and the complaints echoing in the city squares. Have the gods abandoned us? They would ask. The answer to this question was directly linked to the loss of power of kings, because the Hittite king was not only a ruler, but also the representative of the gods on earth. If the king was weak, the support of the gods was also weakened. In this period, the struggles for the throne made the Hittites vulnerable to external threats. The kings, who were busy with the games in the palace, had difficulty in securing the borders. The Kashka tribes started to attack again from the north, and the Assyrians and Babylonians were looking for opportunities in the south. The empire struggled to survive, besieged from within and without. However, the end that followed this turbulent period marked the beginning of the road to the fall of the Hittites. So, my dear friends, had these internal squabbles and fights for the throne sown the seeds of the disaster that brought the end of the Hittite Empire? Or would the Hittites find the strength to rise again? To answer this question, we need to take a look at the external threats the Hittites faced, and in particular, the sea tribes that entered the stage of history like a storm. Are you ready? We are about to discuss who these mysterious aggressors were and how they shaped the fate of the Hittites. My dear listeners, I will now take you into the magical network that the Hittites established with different peoples, which transcended their borders and reached far and wide. Because the power of an empire is not only won with the sword and on the battlefields. Sometimes words, trade routes, and diplomacy create a bond that is stronger than armies. The Hittites were masters of this art. Let us examine together how they built relationships with the Assyrians, Babylonians, and other ancient peoples of Anatolia. The Hittites were not only a warrior nation, they were also a people who knew the intricacies of trade and were as adept at the bargaining table as they were on the battlefield. Ruling over Anatolia's rich mineral deposits, fertile lands, and strategic trade routes, the Hittites made great efforts to strengthen their ties with all the civilizations around them. At the center of these efforts were the valuable commodities they both needed and offered to the other side: bronze, silver, gold, textiles, and even exotic animals. Especially the ties established with the Assyrians are among the most remarkable examples of this period. Assyrian trade colonies were already present in Anatolia before the Hittites were even a kingdom. These relations, which rose on the old trade routes, became more diplomatic in time. Assyrian merchants would show up in the crowded markets of Hattusa with silk fabrics, precious stones, and exotic spices. In return, the Hittites would offer their own riches, their famous copper, bronze, and metalworking artifacts. However, this relationship was not limited to trade. The Hittite kings formed a strong alliance with Assyria and turned to diplomatic marriages and treaties to make their borders more secure. Relations with the Babylonians were of a slightly different nature. Babylon was known as the cradle of culture and science at that time. Babylonian priests and scholars studied the stars and interpreted the messages of the heavens to the Hittite kings. In return for this wisdom, the Hittites offered the Babylonians the precious stones and agricultural products of Anatolia. Moreover, treaties with Babylon were often recorded on written tablets and sealed with an oath before the gods. When a Babylonian envoy was received at the palace of Hattusa, you can be sure that the meeting was both formal and ceremonial. The gifts and letters brought by the envoy symbolized not only a diplomatic, but also a cultural exchange. The Hittite relations with the other peoples of Anatolia were based more on local needs and regional balances. For example, trade agreements with smaller kingdoms such as Artsava helped the Hittites consolidate their power, while at the same time keeping the political balances in Anatolia under control. Although Artsava kings sometimes raised the flag of rebellion against the Hittites, most of the time peace was achieved through diplomacy. Instead of waging war to suppress such rebellions, Hittite kings resorted to methods such as economic sanctions and blocking trade routes. This shows that they were not only warriors, but also had a very pragmatic approach to governance. At the center of all these relations lay the Hittites' unique diplomacy skills. Treaties, sealed with oaths in the name of the gods, efforts to resolve conflicts peacefully, and above all, trade routes that connected people. This network strongly linked the Hittites to the world around them and enriched them culturally as well. But one cannot help but ask, were such well-established diplomatic and commercial ties enough to protect the Hittite Empire from debilitating internal strife and external threats? Or did these ties serve as a lifeline for them during the decline of their empire? In our next story, we will discuss the great threats that shaped the Hittites' destiny and how these bonds stood the test of time. Get ready, my dear friends. Let me take you to one of the most turbulent and mysterious periods of history. The Hittite Empire was like a tree rising to the sky with its splendor. Its roots were deeply rooted in the fertile soil of Anatolia, and its branches reached far and wide. But as all great trees must face, the Hittites would one day be tested by the relentless winds of the storm. And these winds were caused not only by enemy attacks from outside, but also by internal turmoil and the changing face of nature. First of all, we have the sea tribes. These mysterious and frightening peoples. Who were they? Where did they come from? It is still impossible to know exactly, but their stories spread like a hurricane across the Mediterranean. Sweeping the coasts, these people of the sea had a profound impact not only on Hittite lands, but also on Egypt and many other civilizations. Severed trade routes and left the people defenseless. This fear reached even the magnificent palaces of Hattusa. Hittite kings mobilized their armies in the face of this threat, but defenses were often inadequate, as it was not clear where the sea tribes would come from and where they would attack. But dear listeners, to attribute the fall of the empire solely to these external threats would be to ignore the bigger picture. The Hittites were grappling not only with external blows, but also with internal turmoil. Throne disputes, weakening kings, and growing popular discontent caused the empire to rot from within. Rivalries within the royal family made the future of the throne uncertain, which had a profound effect on the army and bureaucracy. How could the people find peace if there was no leader everyone could look to with confidence? It's strange. As if that were not enough, even nature itself was against the Hittites. Climate changes had plunged the fertile lands of Anatolia into drought and tested the people with hunger. The rains did not fall as before, and the fields were cracked. People began to believe that their gods had turned their backs on them. The drought undermined not only the livelihoods of the people, but also the strong trade networks of the Hittites. For Anatolia's rich agricultural products and minerals played an important role in the empire's diplomatic relations. Now, as these resources dwindled, alliances were weakened and trade routes were deserted. With the combination of all these disasters, the Hittite Empire began to slowly wither away. The mighty walls of Hattusa became mere piles of stones, testifying to the glory of the past. People fled the destroyed cities in search of a new life in other lands. That great empire, those glorious Hittites who once ruled all of Anatolia, disappeared from the stage of history. But the legacy they left behind lives on in stone tablets, gigantic walls, and unforgettable stories. But the real question is, why did the sea tribes suddenly appear? Could climate change have been a trigger for their migration and attacks? And in this age of chaos, who filled the void left by the Hittites? In our next story, we will seek the answers to these questions and unveil another dark chapter of history. Get ready, because this is not only the story of the Hittites, but of the entire ancient world. Ah, my dear friends, now I take you to an unforgettable turning point in history, the story of new lives sprouting from the ashes of a great empire. The glory of the Hittite Empire had disappeared into the pages of history. The walls of Hattusa had collapsed, and the names of the great kings were lost in whispers. But this did not mean that the Hittite people had completely disappeared. No, the Hittites continued to exist in a new form, like a thin stream flowing from the drying bed of a river. The late Hittite kingdoms continued to carry on the legacy of this great empire. Small but resilient kingdoms emerged in the fertile lands of Anatolia, especially in the foothills of the Taurus Mountains and in what is now southeastern Anatolia. They preserved the old Hittite traditions and kept their language and religion alive. Each was a shadow of the once glorious Hittite Empire, but these shadows were like shining stars in their own right. Carchemish, Gurgum, Tabal, and many other small kingdoms rose as representatives of Hittite culture. These kingdoms were busy both carrying on the legacy of the Hittites and adapting to their own times. Carchemish was perhaps the most famous of these kingdoms. Situated on the banks of the Euphrates River, it was once one of the most important Hittite centers on the eastern border. After the fall of the Hittite Empire, this city took on a new identity and became one of the most powerful late Hittite kingdoms in the region. The reliefs on the walls of Carchemish still dazzle with traces of ancient Hittite art. Gods and kings continued to silently tell their stories in stone. These works of art showed not only the Hittite heritage, but also how this people adapted to a changing world. For these small kingdoms had to establish relations with giant neighbors, such as the Assyrians, take part in trade routes and sometimes submit. Another important feature of the late Hittite kingdoms was their ability to combine the old and the new. The Hittite hieroglyphic script continued to be used during this period. However, this script was now used not only for religious texts or royal edicts, but also for records of daily life. The old Hittite gods were still commemorated in temples, but these kingdoms also borrowed new gods and rituals from neighboring peoples, creating a cultural synthesis. It was an attempt to build a bridge to the future while holding fast to the past. But dear friends, as with every story, the late Hittite kingdoms came to an end. These small states slowly melted away under the shadow of the Assyrian Empire. One by one, these kingdoms, once heirs to a great empire, succumbed to the Assyrians' ruthless campaigns and expansionist policies. But their culture, art, and heritage from the Hittites was not completely lost. The Assyrians incorporated Hittite art and architecture into their own style, and so the story of the Hittites became part of the story of another great civilization. However, now at the end of this long journey, when we look at the legacy of the Hittites, we see that they did not just build a powerful empire. They engraved a culture, a language, and a way of life in history. This legacy lives on in stones, inscriptions, and folk tales. So, who filled Anatolia's historical stage after the Hittites? In the next story, we will continue to uncover the secrets of Anatolia. The story is not over, my dear friends. The great adventure is just beginning. Beaujolais.